Hi all, this is Joan, Director of Education and Visitor Engagement, and today I'm going to talk to you about the tradition behind an unusual type of still life painting called game piece painting. Now, this was inspired by a couple of paintings in our collection by George Hetzel and his daughter Lila Hetzel. Let's take a look at these. Let's start with a painting by George. And now let's look at the painting by Lila. That's right, game piece painting is a tradition of painting where animals featured in the art, not just any animals, but dead game. Another name for this type of art is dead game trophy art. The painting by George was painted in 1876, and the painting by his daughter Lila was painted in 1897. Now, I asked myself whenever I looked at these paintings, why on earth would anybody want a painting of a dead hanging bird for their house? So I decided to do a little bit of investigating to find out more about this, and I discovered that it comes from a long tradition of still life painting. In particular, it comes from painting in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries. Now, many of you may know that the Dutch in particular had a standing tradition of still life paintings. And you might be familiar with paintings of fruit and flowers and vegetables all piled up on a table, although in some semblance of order to create an attractive display. Another type of still life painting that became popular in Europe was something called the market or kitchen still life, which featured things that people would have eaten beyond just fruit and vegetables. So a lot of meats and game started to appear in these paintings. The tradition of the kitchen scenes from 16th century art expanded into dead trophy art in the 17th century, which became popular with the aristocracy in particular. This was a way for them to show the abundance of wealth and bounty that they had. In Europe, the tradition of hunting actually was within the domain of the wealthy aristocracy and landowners, and only they could hunt on their lands. The land that they owned meant they also owned all of the livestock that were living on there, and only they and their friends could hunt there. After the hunt, the animals would be laid out on the ground in display, and the artist would arrange them in attractive scenarios to paint them. If you look at some of the artworks that have an abundance of these animals in there, swans were a popular bird with their long neck, and artists would often lie them so that the neck created an elegant S-curve. Oftentimes other birds were hung off of implements so that they could be painted. Other animals were arranged throughout the ground to make them into attractive settings. Frequently, actually, the animals such as rabbits and stag and squirrels, for example, would be laid out to have poses almost like humans sleeping to make it a more attractive display. Needless to say, the more animals there were in the dead game trophy art piece, the greater the wealth of the landowner that we were looking at. For the aristocracy, this type of art was really a way to show off their elegance and their excess and their wealth. For the artist, it provided a great opportunity to show off his skill or her skill in the rendering of the various textures of the animals. So an abundant display of birds and dead animals would provide the artist an incredible opportunity to work with different paint colors, different brushstrokes to render the animals as lifelike as possible. So we have the rising middle classes to thank for this type of painting that I was showing you by George and Lila. The proliferation of artworks with only one or two dead animals, oftentimes hanging from a door, was something that became popular as a way for the middle classes to reflect their newfound wealth with hunting scenes, even though they were not permitted still in Europe to hunt on the estates that the wealthy were. So they still had no access to some of the larger game that you would see in the earlier opulent pieces that we were looking at. Now, this type of painting that I was describing to you, where you can look at, for example, the animal in great detail, which allowed the artist to show off their skill of rendering something in a lifelike manner, was called trompe-l'oeil. And this means to basically deceive or trick the eye. And these artists were painting images that, for many folks looking at art back in those days, would be tantamount to what we would think of as a photograph today. They were so skilled and realistic in their rendering. So in answer to my earlier question, where on earth were people hanging this type of art and why was there a market for it? Clearly there was. These types of paintings, even the earlier ones that we were looking at, would have hung in the dining room to remind people of the abundance of where their food came from, and the wealth that they had. And in the case of the smaller paintings, referenced that shift in the middle classes to their ability to do something that only the landowners or the wealthy landowners were able to do at one point in time. I think today there's still a great interest in artwork that features animals in it, and particularly birds are a popular topic, except you're more likely to see them in photography these days. And these days, of course, the animals are more likely to be alive rather than dead. There's more of an interest in capturing the animals in their natural habitat and displaying them in a manner in which is natural to them rather than a state that they've been posed into once they're dead. Now, for anybody who is a photographer of wildlife or even an artist who paints it, there's probably a little bit more of a challenge capturing those images today than there was in the past. You got to think the hard work was done for those artists by the people hunting the livestock, who would leave it to the artist to simply arrange in a pleasing manner so that he or she could paint it. Now, of course, the artist has to capture the image themselves and capture it from life. So in the case of photography, there's a lot more work goes into actually trying to shoot an image of that bird or that animal as it's existing in nature. Ask anybody who is a wildlife photographer. There's a cackling goose over there. Bit of a rarity here. I'm gonna go see if I can take a shot at that one. Don't worry, just with a camera. Thank you again for joining me, everybody. I hope you had a good time. I know this was a little different from some of the artworks we've looked at in the past, but I hope you enjoyed this overview of, again, an unusual type of painting that piqued my interest when I saw it. I'm looking forward to seeing you again next time. Until then, stay well, stay safe, and thank you.